Is Jewish unity in Israel or anywhere else a hopeless cause? The issues that divided Israelis before the October 7, 2023 terrorist attacks haven't gone away now that the fighting has stopped, at least temporarily. The divisions between the right and the left, advocates of judicial reform and its opponents, pro-Netanyahu and anyone but Bibi, Ashkenazi and Mizrahim, the secular and the religious, the Haredim and everyone else. They're all still there, creating not so much a debate about these topics as a still simmering culture war. But some Israelis are still hoping to find a way to overcome all of them. Are they dreaming, or are they the only realists? Today, on Think Twice, we speak with Yoav Heller, the leader of the Fourth Quarter movement, about his quest to help unify Israelis. Hello, and welcome to Think Twice. Today we have an important conversation for you with Israeli historian and activist Yoav Heller, discussing the Fourth Quarter movement and the quest to bring Israelis together. But before we start today's program, I want to remind you, as always, that in addition to Think Twice, there is a Jonathan Tobin daily podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Jonathan Tobin Daily on the JNS channel, wherever you get your podcasts. And now, to today's program. Is the quest to unify Israelis a fairy tale? Given the bitterness of the debates that have polarized Israeli society, the notion that there is any alternative to the political and cultural conflict that continues to rage in the Jewish state can seem like a fantasy. Talk of a possible civil war may have been more hyperbole than reality, but prior to the October 7th attacks, as a faction of Israelis threatened to tear down the state if Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu got his way and reformed an all-powerful and out-of-control judiciary, it was difficult to discern the difference between hyperbolic rhetoric and the reality of a nation tearing itself apart. It's entirely possible that these threats from Netanyahu's opponents encouraged Hamas to strike when it did because they thought Israelis were too focused on hating each other to resist those seeking to destroy them from the outside. Those divisions haven't gone away. Recent incidents involving Haredi misbehavior were a reminder that the judicial reform debate is part of a culture war that divides liberal secular elites from the religious and nationalist communities that they think shouldn't be allowed to govern. But there are some people in Israel who still believe that an effort to focus the nation on the things that can unite them, including a shared belief in Israel as a Jewish and Zionist state with a democratic form of government, can overcome the political warfare. And we're pleased to have one person who is working to do just that. Yoav Heller is chairman of the board of directors of the Wingate Institute. He was part of the staff that established the Ynet media site and went on to serve as one of its senior editors. A historian, he specializes in Holocaust research, and he was one of the founders of the Fourth Quarter activist movement in 2022. Yoav Heller, welcome to Think Twice.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. I want to start by asking you about the Fourth Quarter movement. What does that name mean, and how can it help explain how the divisions in Israeli society might be overcome?
So the Fourth Quarter is a grassroots movement, civic political movement that we established 4 years ago. And why did we call it Fourth Quarter? Because in 1948, they asked David Ben-Gurion, our late Prime Minister, what worries you? Now think about him. He should have been worried about the Arabs invading from different fronts.
Yeah, there was a war going on, right?
Establishing a state. But he said something like he's kind of a prophet. He said, I'm worried when Israel will be in its 70s, a new generation will come about, and that generation will not know the pioneers or the Holocaust survivors. And I fear that they will dwell on the stories of the past rather than writing the story of the future. And that's the story of the Fourth Quarter. We had twice Jewish sovereignty, thousands of years ago. Twice it did not survive beyond the Fourth Quarter, 75 to 100. Actually, that historical phenomenon we can see in American Civil War, we can see the USSR, came down in the Fourth Quarter of its first 100 years. So we thought it's symbolic versus the polarization and what we call the Cold Civil War that was occurring in Israel, that we need a grassroots movement to actually open Israelis' hearts and say two things. One, we have to create a gravitas of an Israeli mainstream, a Zionist mainstream, that will actually not be unified for the sake of unity, but actually in order to create big changes that Israel needs in order to prepare for its future. That's the name, and that's the grassroots movement of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, well, the fourth quarter has cast itself, as you say, as a community-based activist organization rather than as a specifically political project. But how can it achieve any of its objectives ultimately without politics and helping to elect a government that might take up your platform?
That's interesting because we call it a civic political movement. It's bipartisan, but it is political. We were very precise to Israelis that the purpose here is to actually, and that's the two layers that we work upon. Actually, one is to create a mass of Israelis that project to the political system enough. This polarization, this identity politics is killing us. That's one thing. We call it, let's transform from politics of who to politics of what. So that's the first layer. The second layer is we have 6 policy papers that we established through participation democracy, meaning we have experts that write them from right, center, and left, let's say for judicial reform. And then we project them to the tens of thousands of activists. We ask for remarks, comments, feedback. We correct it upon what we think is actually could be efficient. And then we vote on it. More and more traction is created where politicians are saying, please support me, please endorse me. Please say that I support this and this and this. And I think what's special about this movement is that is actually bipartisan. We just had a survey among our supporters in Israeli society. It's between 700,000 people who support us. And we asked, what would you vote if there would be now an election? So listen to this. I'm not sure there's any movement in Israel like this. 21% would vote for Naftali Bennett. 18% would vote for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 9% for Yair Lapid. 6% for Bezalel Smotrich. So as you could see, this is a very, very broad movement, and politicians are looking at it and saying, okay, what do the fourth quarter have to say? We do it through campaigning. We do it through a lot of activities on the ground. That's how we create political influence.
Yeah, so this isn't going to turn into a political party, which is, when everything in Israel always seems to revolve around the creation of new parties. And of course, there have been many Israeli centrist political parties in the last half century, of which, many were vehicles for individuals, usually retired generals, but all have failed, and Israeli politics and society has gotten progressively more polarized, though objectively, centrism always sounds like exactly what Israel needs in a country that is so bifurcated. Something you could also say about the United States right now. Is there really a lane for centrism that could either supplant or work with the Likud and its allies and his opponents?
So first of all, it's interesting because a lot of polarization in Israel, Jonathan, is around sociology. You think of these centrist parties that were created, they were not really centrist. They were sociological, embedded in the center left. And the people from the right did not buy that. That's actually the strength of Benjamin Netanyahu, saying to them, look, this is lefties. These are not, by the way, the policies were center left more than left. So actually, that's why we created a grassroots movement. We're not rejecting politics and participation in politics. We just said, in order to create a real center, a gravitas of a center, you actually need to work from the bottom up, because you need to convince a Likud supporter from Hulon and a Yesh Atid supporter from Tel Aviv that actually they are embedded deeply in Judaism. They're embedded deeply in kind of liberal or moderate liberal policies, free market, and so on and so on. And they have much more in common than politics reflects. Actually, in the next elections, we are thinking of being instrumental in helping new forces, newcomers who are real centrists within the political system to be a party. We just need one party of 8 to 10 mandates that will actually enforce on both sides sitting in a unified government, saying to them, without us, you don't have a government. So unlike what Naftali Bennett, former prime minister, did, he said, I will be the prime minister with 6 mandates.
Mhm.
He creates such a party that will say, I don't want to be the prime minister, but nobody's going to be the prime minister if you guys don't sit together. So that we might also send our hands into direct politics, but that will be separate than the civic movement.
Right. Well, that certainly makes sense. But of course, the failure to create a more broad-based government is rooted in the fact that a lot of the other parties, the non-Likud parties, their leaders just won't sit with Netanyahu. They made it clear, they don't want to be part of a government. They have their reasons for that based on their personal experiences. And that proved to be, sort of, a barrier that couldn't be overcome and really left Netanyahu with no choice but to make, an alliance with the religious parties. And so how does that get overcome? Because the same people are going to be leading these parties in the next election. I don't know that there's going to, more or less, or people with the same mindset. How does, the obsession with Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu get overcome, even with the best of wills and people wanting, them to work together?
So first of all, everybody's mad at me in Israel, Jonathan, because I say there are 2 messianic movements in Israel. One is the Just Bibi movement, and the second one is the Just Not Bibi movement. What is a messianic movement that explains every phenomenon in reality with one explanation? The Just Netanyahu, everything that happens is only thanks to Netanyahu, and the Just Not Netanyahu, everything that happens bad in reality, it's only Netanyahu. If it's good, no, it has nothing to do with Netanyahu. This obsession is killing Israel. And, I think the historical mistake of the Israeli opposition, by the way, I think it's a moral mistake, but also it's a practical mistake. On 11th of October, all Zionist parties should have joined 2023, Benny Gantz, with no conditions. That would achieve 2 things. One, that would be the right moral decisions, to run a war with a unified government with no political calculations. By the way, I tell them, politically, you don't understand Israeli society. It would be also helpful for you politically because people would see that your obsession is lowered down a little bit and you're thinking about Israel. So that brings me back to the idea of a party that sits on these centrist 6, 7 mandates that without them, no bloc has a government. That's why we want to push such an initiative. And then you force the 2 of them. You tell Netanyahu, no, you cannot form once again an all-right, ultra-Orthodox based government for one reason, because we need radical changes on service issues, for example. And on the other side, we say you cannot form a government based on the Arab parties as the 61st mandate. Beyond the 61st mandate, Mansour Abbas, I think, is a worthy partner. But on defense, I think he said that also, on defense issues, whether to attack in Gaza or other places, I think it's too much to ask him to be the 61st vote. So we want to avoid it. I think this is a real danger for Israel, these 2 governments. And you know what? I worried, Jonathan, I worried that the dynamics, I'm actually quite shocked that after October 7, we're in that dynamic as well. But we're going to work very, very hard, and we're going to campaign very, very hard to bring the notion to Israeli society that what matters is politics of what and not the politics of who. Otherwise, we're spinning in the same cycle.
Who leads? I mean, obviously, if you're planning to, in addition to the activist movement, have a party that you hope will get 6 to 8 mandates, who leads it? Because, if there's anything I've learned covering politics as a journalist, as politicians like to tell us, you can't beat somebody with nobody. Are you the leader of that party?
I might be the leader of the party. I think there's a guy, Yoav Heller. I don't know if you know the name. He's the head of the team of the reservists. I think he's a worthy leader. He did great things in the war. I think there's a guy, Dedi Simchi, another worthy guy. He lost his son on October 7. He's a very serious guy. Einat Wilf. I think she's a big name in America. She's a worthy leader.
Sure.
There's the whole field of newcomers. And by the way, Jonathan, it's interesting. We see in
Well, she's working with her own movement, I think right now.
they're all okay. The problem is they're all working.
They're all in business for themselves, as we might say.
Yes, that's why we, for example, I'm not obsessive to lead such a party. I think that we need to be the matchmakers as the fourth quarter. We need to be the people who actually create the alliance of the new ones who commit to three things. One, unified government. If there's no unified government, we're out. Two, you create a legislation reform together, a judicial reform together. We have a policy paper for that. Service for all, or a new Israeli contract, a reform in the educational system, and the security of Israel is not for sale anymore. It means whoever wants to kill us will be killed before that. These are four principles that the newcomers have to go about. But beyond that, we're trying to campaign through the Israeli public to press their own parties to say, enough. We don't want this banning of one another.
Let me drill down on that a little bit. You said a little while ago about how, you've just the poll of your members shows that it is, people from different parties, from the right, from the left. When they come together, what is the dynamic? Because, listen, I know from being in Israel during the war and the year before, the anger is very great, and as you say, the divisions are sociological. These are tribal wars. It's a culture war. If you were in Hostage Square on a Saturday night, you sensed not merely the national trauma, but the anger at, the people they wanted to blame, the people that the speakers were blaming for the continued plight of the hostages. What's the dynamic like when you get people from these different groups together, even though objectively they probably have so much in common, yet they're also still kind of, they're very angry at each other?
So first of all, let's go for what is the self-declaration of Israelis regarding their political views. 4%, this is a shocking 4 to 7% of Israelis define themselves as far left and left. 44% define themselves as center left, center right, and 41% define themselves as right and far right. So as you can see, first of all, it's it's regarding views, not tribes. Israelis agreed on many issues. So that's
I think that's totally right. Especially on security issues.
On security, even Jonathan, we wrote a judicial reform. It's beyond that. It's also straight in the Knesset and so on. And you can see every person from center left to the right agrees upon it. But what we do is we understand that if you start with the policy, it will break in a moment. So what we do is actually our gatherings are first of all about what is your pain? What in the other side hurts you? I'm not telling you agree with him. When a right-wing person talks about the disengagement, please listen to his pain. Please do not, I don't care if you're for it or against it. Don't tell me it was 67 to 45. Understand what he is saying. When a liberal, a lefty, is saying that in January 2023, Yariv Levin, our justice minister, attacked his mere identity with the judicial reform, before you answer him, please absorb what his feeling was. And then we bring, beyond that, the story, what we call the Israeli story. Who are we? And we talk a lot about thousands of years of the dream to come back to Israel. And do we want to be the generation or the first generation in history that actually brings Israel to 100 years with the eyes of the next 100 years? So a lot is about opening the heart, about connecting to a mutual story, about understanding the pains of why are you so tribal? And then magic happens when you start working on policy and the heart is open. I won't tell you it's all smooth. For example, we have a Haredi leadership and ultra-Orthodox leadership in our movement. 6% of the movement are ultra-Orthodox. And now that we finished the paper for what we call the social contract that talks about service for all, some of them left. But it was natural. We knew from day one that when we talk about broad consensus, it's 60, 70%. Can't be. Nothing could be 100%. Otherwise, it doesn't say any.
Moving to specifics, one of the fourth quarter's major priorities, you've already mentioned it, is judicial reform. Something, I would say Israel badly needs. But given the fact that many Israelis on the secular left viewed the power of the judiciary to be their last vestige of power over a potential right-wing religious bloc that they don't merely disagree with, but seem to despise and fear, and have actually hardened their opposition to the point of, in 2023, where some people were threatening civil war, or even the most minimal limits on the power of the judiciary to overrule virtually anything an elected government might do. How is compromise possible on this issue? I know, listen, 10 years ago, people on the left were also talking about judicial reform. But once it became partisan, their positions have just hardened. How do we get over this? Because it's become like a litmus test for so many Israelis.
Look, first of all, I do have criticism towards this government. I think Yariv Levin, with the way the process was run, he created fear, extreme fear among the Israelis that was used by some to energize and hyper-energize the fears. But was also, I live in Tel Aviv, was authentic. People did not understand where it came from. I do also criticize the left for rejecting a lot of the people from the right among the years who were saying, this is not representing us. In many ways, the problem on the political level we have right now, that when you look at the judicial reform, the Israeli right has become progressive and the Israeli left has become ultra-conservative. What do I mean? And I think for Americans, this is something interesting to view. The Israeli right has actually correct claims and blames towards the judicial reform. But their initial solution was, let's just destroy it. Let's run it over with the D9. It's like it's a frame in the Israeli right. And that's not the conservative way. The conservative way is you make changes, but you not destroy everything. The conservatives are not Marxists. On the other hand, the Israeli left has become ultra-conservative. You do not touch anything. No changes. They're sacred. The state attorney is sacred. No, they're not sacred. Guys, you're liberal. You should aim for a little bit of progress. Let's change the judicial reform. So we try to take people out of these echo chambers. And what we say, look, we're offering a 3-layer plan. On the first one, we're saying the basic laws will only be passed by 75 members of Knesset on 3 counts, 3 rounds, and then one more in the next Knesset. Once that happens, the Supreme Court cannot cancel a basic law. That's on the first level. We do a subset of issues like that. For example, we're offering that the judges, which is a heated issue in Israel, will not be nominated by the judges themselves or by politicians. Politicians will select experts that will select the judges. Okay, that's the first layer. The second layer is the most important one. And this also needs to be understood. The problem in Israel and the Supreme Court is very strong. Some of it is self-willingly and some of it because the Knesset, our parliament, is very, very, very weak. Mm-hmm. So we offer the second layer to actually straighten dramatically the Knesset, to shift from 120 to 180 members of Knesset because we're very low on member of Knesset per capita, so they have more time. To actually have hearings, like in the American Senate, of cabinet members every year that they have to report to the Knesset. On actually to have on voting day that you will vote directly to a list, but you'll also mark 5 to 10 members of Knesset directly. So they will be more accountable, not to the head of the party and not to others, but rather to the public. Also, the Knesset can cancel, if one heated issue in Israel, if there are appointments. And then that for ahead of Shabbat. And then they go to the Supreme Court. People say, under what authority are you even sitting on this? So we're offering that the government could choose to go to the Knesset to a vote that will be a vote behind the ballot And the Knesset will decide. So I won't go into more details. You see, the second layer is the Knesset is highly strengthened. Once the Knesset is strengthened, once you understand the basic laws, how they're moved, once you understand how you appoint judges, then you go to the third layer. And then every side gets a dream. The liberals get a scroll of rights, quality, and so on and so on. But now people will not fear because they know that the Supreme Court cannot interpret these scroll of rights. Conservative will not interpret this way.
Basically, a Bill of Rights is what
yes,
you're...
a Bill of Rights. And on the other hand, conservatives will get the fact that today every person could actually appeal to the Supreme Court about everything. And we're saying, no, from now on, you will need to have actually directly a stand. Or
as the lawyers would say, justiciability.
Yes, justiciability. Perfect. And that's the dream of the right. And we're saying within 5 years, this will be achieved. Every step, we need to have 70 members of Knesset that approve. It's a one pack. And once again, tens of thousands of Israelis from all sides already agreed upon it. So as you can see, we offer broad solutions that actually make sense for all sides.
Yeah, that does sound very good. I mean, I could see the arguments. I mean, expanding the Knesset makes a lot of sense because the 120 members are definitely overwhelmed, and there's too much for them to do. On the other, and I'm sure politicians would be in favor of 60 more jobs, and I'm sure a lot of voters would not be necessarily happy about 60 more people on the public payroll.
My PR people resist me saying that and say people will ask you, we have now 120 parasites. Do you want 180 parasites?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I tell them, guys, let's not be populist. This is something we need to do.
No, that makes sense. Now, when we speak of democracy, I think within Israel, there is clearly a consensus in favor of Israel being democratic. But I think the problem, as was the case with the judicial reform, that it's a matter of a lot of people, not just in Israel, but also in the United States and Europe, having come to sort of redefine democracy as synonymous with their side maintaining power, rather than just majority rule with minority rights guaranteed. How do we overcome that?
So I think, once again, balance, after World War II, I think Netanyahu coined the term politics of responsibility. People understood that these extreme ideologies that tend to actually tilt the ship of the state from the left to the right are very dangerous. I think in the past years, 15 years, since the social networks and so on, once again, balance has been, and polarization has been up. Balance between the different authorities has been just shoved down, and it's very dangerous. And I think the argument in its basis is the following. I think the right is saying, that's the deep state argument, is saying, I don't feel anymore that my vote counts. Because there is an echelon of, that in the United States, an echelon of state employees that actually do whatever they want. They're liberal and so on. They're part of the elite.
Yeah, the administrative state.
Administrative state. And I think to some degree, they're right. And that you could see in Israel in the power that the Supreme Court absorbed. You could see sometimes in the state attorney office and so on and so on. On the other hand, these people took it too much to the extreme, saying, and the only thing that counts is my vote. Meaning there's no balances, no checks and balances. I always ask ultra-Orthodox, let's say there will be a liberal government, and they will say that buses will drive in the middle of Bnei Brak on Shabbat. With your logic, you're saying they're allowed to do it because they voted, they got the vote. And I said, no, they're not allowed to do it because there are rights of minorities. So the left is saying we need to keep the balance of right of minorities. The problem with the left is, and it fears, rightly so, it fears that there will be no balance and that ruling government in Israel will have unlimited power. The problem is...
And some of these fears are rooted in ideas about demography. That was the big thing about the 2022 election. I think some people on the left started to think, we'll never win another election. So how do we deal with this?
Yeah, but, I brought the people from the right and the left an example from the United States. I wonder if you would agree with me. I said the following. Yariv Levin and Netanyahu, when they created the judicial reform, I think their assumption, especially Yariv Levin, was that the right will always win. Demography means the right cannot lose. Otherwise, he would not, for example, say that in the committee that chooses the judges will be 5 coalition and 2 opposition, unless you think you're always in ruling. But I told them, look, I think in 2008, after President Obama won, I think many Democrats said, we can't lose anymore. Demography is not in our favor. I told them, I tell people on the right, play the demographic game in your policy, assuming that you will always win. As you see in the States, things changes. By the way, if the Arabs vote 70%, the right 15 years will not be winning government. So I tell people, stop this demographic game.
Well, I think you're totally right. Certainly in American politics, and I've been covering American politics. Anytime anybody wins an election, you could go back further than 2008 with Obama, 4 years before that, when Bush and the Republicans won and everybody thought Karl Rove had found the magic formula. Every time anybody wins an election in the United States, they always think it's the beginning of a 1,000-year Reich. And usually within 2 to 4 years, they're proved wrong. So that may well be true in Israel as well.
Yeah.
Now, one of the talking points, one of the issues that the fourth quarter has brought up is a belief in the need for new leadership, which is sort of axiomatic in any democracy, but which in the context of Israel today is usually interpreted as a comment on the longevity and power of Benjamin Netanyahu. Your movement began as a reaction to the nightmare of 5 elections in 2+ years that Israel went through from 2019 to 2022. Since Netanyahu is not immortal, there will come a day when he won't be leading the Likud, but given his popularity on the right and the absence of a plausible alternative, which is obviously to some extent his own doing, but how does Israel get past the pro-Bibi, anti-Bibi impasse as long as he's still there and not willing to give up?
So I say the following. First of all, people ask me, what is your opinion about Netanyahu? And I tell them, look, I'll tell you frankly, he's 17 years minus 1 year when Bennett was prime minister. I'm not talking about 96 to 99, the prime minister. And he was the prime minister on October 7th.
And he's been the leader of the Likud since 93, except for, an interregnum with Sharon in the early 2000s.
I don't think it's a radical statement to say it's time to replace him. That's what I tell people. It's not. I think it's better for democracy. I think he's responsible for 7th of October with the heads of the security establishment. I salute him for some of the achievements in the war. I think he ran some of the war, great parts of it, very well. But I think he should be replaced. I actually tremendously hope that he will be replaced. But the only way to start fixing and not breaking Israel is recognizing this following fact, that he might win. And if he wins, I think he has the responsibility to invite all Zionist parties inside. And I think parties like Bennett, Eisenkot, and others have to join his government only if he wins. I tell them, try to beat him. Why? And by the way, vice versa, also Likud to the other side. Why? Because we do not create this judicial reform with a constituency at the end, if we do not actually create a social contract where everybody serves, and if we do not reform our educational system, we're going to have a problem to actually be the startup nation, spiritual nation for the Jews, and actually to lead in the Middle East. We're playing here with fire. And I'll tell you the truth, Jonathan, we've been highly attacked in the past 2 months with that message. On the left or in the center left, and I understand it. Emotionally, it does not resonate with people. They feel that Netanyahu is attacking them personally. They feel that he's too much. They talk about Kartaigate and so on. I resonate with a lot of their sin. But I'm telling them, okay, so try to beat them. I did not, by the way, I tell people, this is one of the worst coalitions that we had, I think. And this is one of the worst oppositions that we had in the history. And the opposition is asking me, why are you insulting us? I tell them, look, guys, my statement is based upon the fact that I read polls. You should have been after October 7, 75, 80 mandates right now. You should have actually crushed Netanyahu in the next elections, of course, politically. But you're not. So I am a Zionist, a patriot. I believe in the eternity and the chain of generations of Judaism in the state of Israel, and I'm not going to play with fire. So if he wins, I'll go with him, please. That's what we're trying to campaign for, but I worry. I tell you the truth. I worry about it.
Now, recently I read an article on Haaretz which criticized your movement for being, as they put it, for everyone but the Palestinians. But you've also been quoted as saying that you'd like to get the word peace back into the national discussion in Israel. How can that happen, though, as long as the Palestinians, or at least the groups that represent them, seem uninterested in it, and something that the horrors of October 7th, much like, and the war that followed, much like the Second Intifada, has seemed to prove? How do we get past that?
Okay, so let's unpack here two issues. One, full disclosure, I rarely agree with the Haaretz on anything. Okay, so just for
Okay, well, you're not alone in that.
Yeah, let's unpack it. First of all, Israeli Arabs, the citizens of Israel, I'm not sure there's even a movement in Israel that talks so much about their rights, about tackling their problems, and so on and so on. So we're for full equality. Okay. Regarding security issue, I think the October 7th shows us the following. That on the one hand, the mainstream of the Palestinian movement has never recognized Zionism, has never recognized the state of Israel. They have two tools in their war against Israel. One is, even when they said two-state solutions, when we said in the 90s, we meant Palestine, and I was for it. We meant a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. They did not mean that. They never said that. So that's one thing. They're not even the pro-peace. They're not pro-two-state solution. That's one problem. The second problem is their usage of the refugee issue, the right of return, as they call it. I don't think they do have a right of return, as a tool to actually destroy the state of Israel. Because what does it mean? That according to them, 7 million refugees will come back to Israel. And we saw on October 7, when Muhammad comes back to Israel, he doesn't knock on your door and say, Jonathan, will you please go out of my house? No, he slaughters you, he rapes you, he loots you. I think that's a reality. We have to look at it into the eyes. What we're saying is, on the other hand, if there will one day be Palestinian leader that will say, good morning, without preconditions, I recognize the state of Israel. I'm not talking even of what is the territory. I recognize that the Jews have a state. They have a historical connection to the land. And two, we are not for the right of return. We give up the right of return. Then I think the dream of the Jewish people is peace. He will find that the Jews are compromiser. We compromised in 47. We wanted to compromise after 67. We compromised in Sinai. We tried to compromise in Oslo. Barak offered in Camp David. Olmert offered. I don't think that the Jews are the problem for compromise. I think it's very important also that American Jewry will hear that. I think there's a whole movement to delegitimize the mere existence of Israel. The Palestinians are riding that movement. If more and more forces in the world will say to them, enough is enough, we do not support you. That's why I think the war against Iran is so important. Because I want a child in Beirut, in Damascus, in Jenin, in Nablus, or in Gaza to wake up in the morning and get out of his head the dream that the Jewish state could be destroyed, and understand that actually he could live in peace with the Jews. And the Haaretz is blaming Israel for these things. And I don't support all the policies in Judea and Samaria of the government, but it has nothing to do with the fact that there's no peace. I hope that's clear. They don't have to agree with me, but that's our stand.
Yeah, that is true. And of course, they're getting the opposite message from much of the world, unfortunately. Now, sort of related to that, in recent years, and many Israelis, the Netanyahu government and people who are not in the government, there's been tremendous amount of optimism about the Abraham Accords, good relations with the UAE and an expectation among many that sooner or later the Saudis would also embrace normalization. But now that Iran isn't quite the threat it was, when the U.S. seemed to be interested in appeasing it, the Saudis seem to be turning away from that now. Do you think that's temporary, or has all that optimism ultimately been sunk by the intractable nature of the conflict, which is rooted in religion as much as anything else? And while promoting the startup economy has to be a priority, as your movement states, have Israelis put too much faith in technology overwhelming otherwise intractable conflicts?
Look, I think by definition, first of all, the geostrategic posture of Israel in the Middle East is better now than in 6th and 7th of October. That's a fact.
Sure.
We see the Shia axis together with Hamas and the ultras, they're weaker. That's a fact. I think the opportunities, we should not push them too soon. I think Saudi, has internal problems. I think MBS overpromised to himself, to some of his people, to the world, and he's seeing that economically and more and more traditionally, that the progression there is more problematic. And so I'm not sure it's directly connected to Israel, but it actually portrays itself in his lack of willingness to join Abraham Accords. I still think that Israel needs to have a 3-layer approach to the conflict. One, yes, is a regional approach. From India, by the way, all the way to Africa, Middle East, up to Greece. I think in many ways the vision of President Trump, also President Biden talked about it. I still think that Israel now does not need to look at himself coming inside and protecting only itself. It doesn't work. We need alliances, seeking them, being patient, but actually being very, very active in shaping the Middle East. I think the second layer is fighting what Einat Vilf called Palestinianism. It means that economically, militarily, and on all bases, Israel needs to have the initiative against forces who say that they want to destroy it. Whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Damascus, whether it's in campuses around the world. So there we need to be active in portraying to the world, this is a big no-no. Israel cannot actually afford, like we did in the 6th of October and before, these monsters on our fences telling us, I want to destroy you. I'm arming myself. And we say, but if we'll be quiet, we'll be quiet. That's the second layer, much more initiative. And the third layer is actually portraying to the Palestinians. You will get more and more and more autonomy when we'll see less and less terror. We'll see de-radicalization. We'll see the changing of your books. And we'll see that things are stabilizing in Gaza. Meaning, we have a regional approach and their high-tech and economy is very important. We need to have a stiff arm against all those who are actually aiming to destroy us, and take the initiative totally. And we need to portray to the Palestinians that de-radicalization steps will lead gradually to more autonomy and one day to peace. I think that should be what the mainstream Israeli policy should be in the next few years, and I hope it will.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most interesting elements of what your movement, the fourth quarter, is trying to do is an attempt to increase what I guess we'd call in the United States volunteerism and local-based philanthropy in a country like Israel, where the state has always been looked to as the solution to pretty much all problems, which is in stark contrast to the culture of diaspora communities. What's been the response from Israelis to this initiative?
So it's a brilliant question, because our initial statement to people was, look, you are not satisfied with the situation. Polarization is wearing you down. You don't understand why we're not solving problems. You see what's happening in the streets. And your instinct is actually to blame the politicians and the press. So, no, the fourth quarter is actually saying that whose fault is it? Mine, our fault. We are to be blamed, but we told people, but there's good news. We are the solution also. If we will take the initiative and start on a community basis, then on a regional basis, to advocate enough is enough, then things will change. At the beginning, it was a very hard message to convey because Israelis are used to a more centralized approach. But, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have already participated in our activities. We have probably the biggest membership today among civic movements in Israel. So something is working there. Especially after October 7th, Israelis understood that when they say the state, we are the state. Who's the state? That's not who is it? What are these walls? We are the state. And what we're even more proud is with the competition that we have. When we started the fourth quarter 4 years ago, there were rarely civic, political, all-Israeli movements talking about unity, talking about local activism. There are tens of them. Some of them are doing even things that are better than us today. But we're proud of it. We've created a field. Israelis have taken initiative.
Yeah. Now, in the time we have left, there's so much to talk about, but I want to ask you one question. Based on your background, which is a historian of the Holocaust, what is your reaction to the way analogies to the Shoah seem to have proliferated in recent years, to the point where, at least in the United States, it seems to be almost an all-purpose metaphor for anything bad, and anyone you don't like can be analogized to Hitler, with, as even just in the last week, major intellectual forums like the New York Review of Books actually defending the idea that there's an analogy between Anne Frank and efforts to curb illegal immigration in this country. What are we to make of this?
I think the following. I always told people that Holocaust is not out of history. Holocaust is something there are more lessons from the Holocaust. So I don't want people to say this is sacred, don't touch it. I actually want people to learn about the Holocaust and ask themselves, what's the moral lesson for me as a human being, for my state, for civilization? That's on the one hand. But what happened in the past few years, the term Holocaust has been tormented. It's almost to a degree that I rather people don't talk about the Holocaust. Why? Because they don't understand the unprecedented nature of the Holocaust. They don't understand, people accused Israel of a genocide, okay? And I told people, look, think of this analogy. In what genocide in history, the people who were the alleged victims could have stopped the genocide? What the Jews in Europe could say, stop, okay, let's sign a deal. The Armenians that were slaughtered by the Turks, they could say, let's sign a deal. Hamas, in 30 seconds, and it was proved, could have stopped the genocide, which was not a genocide, it was a war, by signing a deal, releasing the hostages and surrendering. So I told people, do you understand that actually real genocides are being committed around the world? So the fact this term has been tormented, I think at the end of the day, and I tell it to many people who are my progressive friends, this will backlash against people in Sudan and other places where real genocide is being committed. But the comparison to a Holocaust, where everything is a Holocaust, so nothing is a Holocaust.
Right.
And I think it's shameful. It's a disgrace to the memory of the Holocaust survivors, but even more dangerous. It's dangerous to the future victims and the current victims to real slaughters and genocide that are occurring in the world, not in Israel. For example, these tens of thousands of Iranians, Persians that were slaughtered by their own government. Where is everyone? Where is everyone? I'm not talking about President Trump. I'm talking about the people, these people who accused Israel. Why aren't they advocating for all-in war in order to stop this genocidal regime? So I don't buy these metaphors, and I think they're dangerous, actually.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about that. Yoav, thanks so much for joining us today. How can our audience find out more about the fourth quarter and follow your work?
So first of all, please visit. We have a website on English. We publish their podcast in English, and thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a real honor for hosting us. We come from time to time to America. For example, in the beginning of March, we're in Boston and New York, and we talk to public audiences. So follow also that. But basically, our website in English is a good way to follow us and hear about us and communicate with us. Yeah, that's the way.
Okay. Well, we also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition, which you can hear wherever you get your podcasts. And whether you're listening to us on any one of them or watching us live on Facebook or X or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at thinktwice@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again next week.